Hi, I'm Dave Randle, and as part of the climate presentation with Dr. Reese Halder, Reese and I were talking last night and felt it was important for me to give a little bit of theological context to his presentation today, some kind of a spiritual rooting for what he is going to speak out. So I kind of dusted off an old talk, and forgive me if it's not polished, but I want to give you a sense of some of the history and spiritual traditions that tie this climate change together. I'd like to begin today by reflecting on the well-known parable of the prodigal son. As you recall, this is a story of a father with two sons, and the younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property, partying everywhere he could. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, yet no one gave him anything. Think about that for a second. A Jew having to work feeding pigs, the ultimate indignity. However, when you need to survive, you do not have the same frames and boundaries that you might otherwise. So while feeding the pigs, he reflected and said to himself that his father's hired hands have bread enough to spare, but here I am dying of hunger. I will get up, I'll go to my father, and I'll say to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands." So he went home to see his father. But while he was still far off, the father saw him coming and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him, and then the son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his slaves, "Quickly, bring out a robe of the best one and put it on him. Put a ring on his fingers and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine is alive again. He was lost, and now he's found." And they began to celebrate. And the older son was in the field. He came and approached the house. He heard music and dancing. And he called to one of the slaves and asked, "What is going on?" They replied, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound." Then the elder son became very, very angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, "For all these years I have been working like a slave for you. I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never even given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you kill the fatted calf for him." Then the father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost, and now he is found." This is a great story about the dimensions of God's love, which has no frames or boundaries. It is a boundless love, able to accept and forgive beyond logic, or even, for some, beyond understanding. Now I ask you today, who was the one, if you were paying attention, that is most upset with the younger son's return home? Yes. No, not the elder brother, but that is the choice that most people make. Perhaps the one most upset was the fatted calf. Now, why do most immediately think the eldest son is the person most upset instead of the one who is probably really most upset, the fatted calf? Is it not because we have set frames and boundaries on what we see as reality, and frames and boundaries on what we allow our brain to consider as alternatives? A sponsored delegation from Afghanistan. One of the comments of the delegation was how surprised they were to find that Americans could actually be friendly people. But when you consider that they had lived under the strict Taliban rule, where America was framed as the great Satan, followed by their negative experience of US soldiers invading their country, it is not surprising that they had this reaction. They had framed our country with the only possibility as being one that was unfriendly, and had not yet crossed the boundary of another reality. Today, our world faces a much greater threat than Iraq or Iran and weapons of mass destruction, or even the threat of al-Qaeda. We face the threat of destroying the very sustainability of this planet for life as we have known it. And although we have made great progress since the 1992 Earth Summit in the development of technology, the understanding of the relationships between poverty and environment, and the policies needed to achieve sustainability, we have got arguably worse since the Earth Summit, not better. Consider the following. Today, we have 1 billion people who do not have access to safe water, and half the world's 500 major rivers are seriously polluted. In Latin America, only 2% of the sewage receives any kind of treatment at all. 1/3 of humanity now lives in countries where water consumption exceeds the renewable supply, while 90% of fresh water is being used for agriculture. More than 1/2 of all the people on Earth live within 60 miles of a seashore, and our oceans that sustain life are seriously threatened. Climate change threatens all ecosystems in the world. Here in Florida, large areas, including much of our own Pinellas County, may be underwater. And looking at land, globally, we have degraded 5 billion acres of land through mismanagement and overuse of pesticides. 80% of the woodlands that once encircled the earth have been cleared. In the industrialized world, over 60% of all medicine originated in the wild, yet 1/3 of all plants and animals, including sources of miracle cures, may face extinction in the next 50 years. Let me give you an example of 2 trees. In Indonesia, researchers found a tree where the trial tests believed brought forth the promise of a cure for HIV/AIDS. But when they came back to get more samples, the forest was clear-cut, and not a species specimen of that tree remained to be found. A perhaps cure lost in the extinction of that tree species. On the other hand, they found a tree in California where the bark has been found effective in treating breast cancer. Unfortunately, there's not enough of these trees left for all the breast cancer there is to treat in this country, let alone the world. However, what they did find was a way to make a synthetic version of this bark. So that tree being saved has brought forth new hope for the treatment of breast cancer. And in the area of hazardous waste and toxic chemicals, during the past 50 years, productions of synthetic chemicals increased more than 300 times. An estimated 200,000 to 570,000 people die every year from health problems related to air pollution. Worldwide, 5 to 6 billion pounds of pesticides are added to the environment each year, with 1/4 of that released or sold in the USA, causing US farmers to now have to apply 2 to 5 times as much as it took to accomplish the same effect in 1970. The average American consumes 50 times more than a person in a developing country. And the average world per capita income is $5,000 per year, yet 1.3 billion people on this planet live on less than $2 a day, while 20% of the world's population uses 60% of the world's energy. For the first time in the history of creation, the life support systems of the planet Earth are being destroyed by human activities. Throughout history, humans have caused significant damage to the environment, but never before have human numbers and actions combined to threaten the integrity of the entire planet. We may not only be the end of an historical era, but perhaps the end of a biological and geological one as well. Our crisis is unprecedented. Many people of faith are concerned about what we are doing to the environment. Carl Jung said he was convinced that it did not matter whether we looked in or out, we saw the same things. Now think about that. Can we really be concerned about polluted rivers when we are not concerned with our polluted bloodstreams? Can we care with the earth without learning to care for our bodies? Can we manage energy resources without learning to manage our own internal energy? Can we solve air quality issues behind political smoke-filled rooms? As a theologian, I believe that perhaps our present healthcare and ecological crisis is God's way of telling us that something is wrong with our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with each other, and our relationship with the land. The word crisis in Chinese has two meanings. The first is danger. The second, opportunity. The danger is clear. The opportunity is perhaps more difficult to realize. I would like to suggest that one of the opportunities that we have is to reconsider some of the biblical ideas of the land to give us insight for a vision of right relationships. In 1855, Chief Seattle is reported to have wrote to the President of the United States, quote, "One thing we know which the white men may one day discover. Our God is the same God. You may think you own him as you wish to own our land, but you cannot. And God's compassion is equal for the red man and the white. The earth is precious to God, and to harm the earth is to heap contempt on its creator. The whites too shall pass, perhaps sooner than other tribes. Continue to contaminate your bed, and you will one night suffocate in your own waste. End quote. Pretty powerful image. As a theologian, I find it sad that so many so-called religious people of our day seem to have forgotten this simple concept of Chief Seattle, that our God is the same God, and if we harm the earth, we heap contempt on the Creator. Think about it for a minute. Have you ever noticed that there's no such thing as a Protestant sun, an LDS moon, an Orthodox mountain, a Buddhist river, a Roman Catholic ocean, or a Unitarian forest? If you've noticed this, then you are one of the first to notice it. Most people never stop to think that these aspects of creation are one within all religions. But Chief Seattle was more correct than you may know in his notion that we all have the same God. For at the root of the Judeo-Christian religion, the land was sacred, and all biblical evidence shows that God is not only the first, but perhaps also the strongest environmentalist. Now, I know that some will take offense to that. I know that God may not have had the wisdom of some of the religious traditions in this area we call fundamentalists, who know in their heart that environmentalists are the root cause of all evil. However, nonetheless, I believe that we can learn deep wisdom in our biblical traditions. A mentor of mine was fond of saying that the Bible is more true because it happens than because it happened. In fact, I believe that the stories which contain deep archetypes of our culture is the greatest treasure that the church possesses. And it is from this perspective that I want to reflect this morning on some of the rich stories of the bigger story, the Bible. And although some curse environmentalists from their own religious truth, for whatever reason, when God created the sun, the moon, the rivers, the animals, the birds, the sea, and all the creatures, the reaction of God was that it was good. It was very good. In fact, the Hebrew word was tov. Tov is like awesome, fantastic. It was tov. God didn't say we have to get rid of all these worthless creatures, destroy the wilderness, and ruin the clean air and water so that we can support what we casually call progress. No. God looked at all creation and said that it was very good. It was tov. Later, we read that God warned Noah of the flood. In this story, God didn't say, let's see how many humans we can put in the ark and forget about the rest of the animals because humans are so much more important. No. Instead, God implemented what I call the First Endangered Species Act and said, let's get as much biodiversity as possible in this ark. Biodiversity was a value of God's long before the word environmentalist was invented. Then after the flood, God gave the rainbow, the mixing of sunshine and rain, as a sign of the covenant. Following the covenant, God gave recognition that the animals have their own value separate from humans by making a separate covenant with them. God, then noticing that the earth was no longer very populated, big floods will do that, you know. Floods, in fact, remain today the largest cause of property damage and death in the world. So after the flood, God blessed Noah and his sons, like he did Adam and Eve, saying, quote, "Be fruitful and multiply, abound on the earth and multiply in it." Genesis 9:7. But then we read a few verses farther and find that in verse 19, that the earth was populated. Okay, mission accomplished. We don't need to keep doing that one. How about moving on to some other commandments for now? The story then continues, and we learn that God values conservation and the precautionary principle. For example, in the story of Joseph and Pharaoh, when the signs predicted that environmental disaster and famine were on the way, the plan that Joseph came up with was to conserve 20% so that there would be resources not only to get through the crisis, but also to provide for the other nations and the next generation to get through the crisis as well. The story then continues with the law of Moses. Here we learn that to God, because the land was sacred, the first fruits of the crops were offered to God, who is the rightful owner of the land. Because the land belonged to God and was therefore sacred, the land shall not be sold in perpetuity. For the land is mine, you are strangers and sojourners with me. Because the land was sacred, the land, also like the people, had to keep the Sabbath. Every 7 years, the land was rested, which we know today is a good agricultural practice. Because the land was sacred, it was treated in a holy way. You shall not defile the land in which you live, in the midst of which I dwelt, for I, the Lord, dwell in the midst of the people of Israel. Furthermore, if the people sinned, God said that there may be consequences from the sacred land. When the people of Israel sinned, either the land suffers or the land ejects the people. To put it bluntly, the Bible says, those who defile the land will vomit them out. Agricultural laws were given for the land. And when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all of it, so the poor and strangers may have some food. After the story of Moses, we then get an interesting biblical insight as to the relationship of wisdom and the earth. We learn that King Solomon was considered the wisest of all people. Why was Solomon considered wise? The Bible says because he could have discourses on nature. He could write songs and poetry, not because he made a lot of money taxing people. The story continues, and the prophets clarified the sacred land further. For example, Isaiah puts the matter this way: the earth lies polluted under the inhabitants, for they have transgressed the laws, violated the statutes, broken the everlasting covenant. Isaiah, though, had a vision for the land. He saw it as a place where the wolf would lay down with the lamb, the leopard lay down with the kid, the calf and the lion would be friends, and a little child would lead them. The vision was expanded to also say, for behold, I create new heavens and a new earth. The prophet Hosea said, there will come a time when God will make a covenant with the beasts of the land, the birds of the air, the creeping things on the ground, and God will abolish the bow, the sword, and war from the land. And at this time, God will engage the people's righteousness, justice, love, and mercy. Think what our world would be like today if we returned to the ancient idea of the land being sacred. If we viewed God or the Great Spirit as the owner of the land and we the caretakers, if we set aside some of the harvest for the poor and needy, if we viewed our role of journeyers with God in God's land, not residents in our land, if we kept from polluting the land because of its sacredness, if we had an awareness that if we did not take care of the land, it would not sustain us and may even vomit us out. If we realize that our greed may result in the land not producing, what if we could take the prophet seriously and realize that environmental destruction also means human destruction? What if we could reclaim the biblical vision of harmony with the land, where humans and nature would be at peace rather than war with each other? Perhaps the present ecological crisis is a sign that we are at a time where we need to wander in the wilderness, to get back in touch with the power of nature so that we can go forth to realize more of our full potential. And if that was not enough evidence of God being an environmentalist, we then have the Christian message that, quote, God so loved the world that he gave his only son, end quote. Notice, it does not say that God so loved the human beings, or God so loved the United States, or God so loved any particular religion. It says, God so loved the world. Actually, the Greek word is cosmos, meaning God loved the entire earth, all of creation, all the wonders of nature. In other words, God's love has no frames, no boundaries. It is rooted in oneness. Oneness is the final prayer that Jesus shared before his death when he prayed that they may all be one. If from whatever religious or spiritual tradition you come from, if you claim that you love God, then shouldn't you also claim that you love the things God loves? How can any spiritual person say that they love God if they do not love the same thing God loves, namely our home, planet Earth? How did Chief Seattle say it? To harm the earth is to heap contempt on the Creator. In the Christian tradition, St. Paul says it this way in his letter to the Romans: creation itself will set free from its enslavement to decay. For Paul, there was no meaningful salvation of liberation of humans without liberation of the environment as well. Today, it seems clear that it will not be political leaders, new policies that will save us from environmental destruction, though they can help us along. Nor will it be national revolt as envisioned by the religious zealots of our time. Rather, if we hope once again to obtain balance and harmony with nature and good relationships with ourselves and each other, it will most likely be through our efforts to develop new norms for living from what Albert Schweitzer termed an ethic of irreverence for life. I urge you to consider the contribution you can make and then let that community know what you have done and what you're continuing to do as evidence that you have seen the signs and are responding accordingly. I urge you to do this out of a sense of oneness and unity from a new perspective of no frames, no boundaries. I want to pause for a moment and reflect on this idea with a video featuring the astronaut Rusty Schweiger.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour.
took thousands of people, almost 10 years, and billions of dollars to lift a human being into space. Russell Schweikert, lunar module pilot for the Apollo 9 flight, recalls the experience.
You go around it in an hour and a half, you begin to recognize that your identity is with that whole thing. And that makes a change. And you look down there and you can't imagine how many borders and boundaries you cross again and again and again. And you don't even see them. From where you see it, the thing is a whole and it's so beautiful. And you recall standing out there, the spectacle that went before your eyes. Because now you're no longer inside something with a window looking out at a picture. But now you're out there, and there are no limits to it. There are no frames. There are no boundaries. There are no frames. There are no boundaries. And you think about what you're experiencing and why. Do you deserve this fantastic experience? Are you separated out to be touched by God, to have some special experience here that other men cannot have? And you know the answer to that is no. You know very well at that moment, and it comes through to you so powerfully that you're the sensing element for man.
The sensing element. From that immense perspective of outer space, we can gain an insight into mankind's true relationship with the universe, with planet Earth, and with all life as we know it. A new perspective for all humanity, a perspective for what Einstein had called a new mode of thinking.
There you are, hundreds of people killing each other over some imaginary line that you're not even aware of, that you can't see. And from where you see it, the thing is a whole and it's so beautiful. And you wish you could take one in each hand and say, look at it from this perspective. Look at that. What's important? And you realize that on that small spot, that little blue and white thing, is everything that means anything to you. All of history and music and poetry and art and birth and love, tears, joy, games, all of it on that little spot out there that you can cover with your thumb. You look down and you see that surface of that globe that you've lived on all this time, and you know all those people down there, and they are like you, they are you, and somehow you represent them. You are up there as the sensing element, and that's a humbling feeling. And somehow you recognize that you're a piece of this total life.
This sense of interconnectedness, interdependence, has been spoken of in every language and faith since the beginning. Buddhism.
自分に害を与えるようなものは hurt not others in ways that you yourself would find hurtful.
Hinduism.
किसी से ऐसा व्यवहार न करो. Do not unto others what would cause you pain if done to you.
Judaism.
Ma shesanu el reacha. What is hateful to you, do not do to others.
Taoism.
我邻人所获得的，也是我所获得。Regard your neighbor's gain as your own gain, and your neighbor's loss as your own loss.
Christianity.
All things whatsoever ye would that men should do unto you, do ye even so unto them.
Islam.
ایمان نیاوردید تا هنگامی که آنچه برای خود می‌خواهید. No one of you is a believer until he desires for his brother that which he desires for himself.
The genius of the ancients and the most modern scientific knowledge agree. The microcosm and the macrocosm are one interconnected, unified system. And we are one human family. We live on one earth. We breathe the same air, drink the same water. We have the same needs and hopes and dreams. We will move forward now with a new spirit of inclusiveness and cooperation toward all people, all nations, all races, and all religions, understanding each other's frames and boundaries. Then we can begin to bring about a world where people can live and work together in peace, on a planet surrounded not by fire, but by a spirit of goodwill for all life.
Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter." Who here today wants a life that does matter? Thank you.